Kizera felt the weight of 6,000 eyes upon him as his claw tips danced across the neural interface. The holographic display expanded, filling the chamber with a three-dimensional image of Earth, a swirling blue-green marble that looked deceptively fragile against the void of space. "This planet contains only one sentient species," Kizera began, his voice steady despite the tension knotting his secondary stomach. "No natural armor. No claws. No venom. Their fastest runner would be outpaced by our weakest young. Their strongest would struggle against our elderly. Their sensory range is so limited they've only recently discovered portions of the electromagnetic spectrum we evolved perceiving." The Supreme Commander's faceplates shifted in what Kizera recognized as the Voidborn equivalent of a dismissive smile. "You've spent too much time among them, Ambassador. Your findings contradict our entire xenobiological database. Primitive species with limited capabilities are the simplest to subjugate." Kizera inclined his head in the human gesture of acknowledgement he'd unconsciously adopted. "Supreme Commander, with respect, that database was compiled from 17 conquered worlds, all with predictable response patterns. Humans are different." "Different how?" demanded the military strategist, her temporal lobes pulsing with skepticism. Kizera expanded the hologram, zooming in on Earth's surface to reveal a montage of human activities. Children playing war games in suburban backyards, engineers testing experimental aircraft, soldiers training in desert conditions, scientists working in laboratories, farmers harvesting crops with massive machinery. "Observe these behaviors," Kizera instructed. "Note the consistent pattern of simulated conflict even among their young. Their entire development cycle includes preparation for threats that don't yet exist. They call it imagination, the ability to model potential futures and prepare responses to them." The acquisition minister leaned forward, twin antennae twitching. "All thinking species can anticipate danger. This is not unique." "But the human capacity is," Kizera countered. He tapped the interface again, and the hologram shifted to display human entertainment. Action films showing improbable heroes overcoming impossible odds, historical documentaries of smaller forces defeating larger ones, virtual scenarios where players faced overwhelming challenges. "This is not merely entertainment," Kizera explained. "It's distributed cognitive training. Humans voluntarily immerse themselves in simulated no-win scenarios repeatedly, conditioning their neural pathways to reject surrender even when all logical analysis indicates defeat is inevitable." Murmurs rippled through the council. The science director's color membranes flushed a deep purple of concern. "You believe these entertainment products make them dangerous adversaries?" he asked, voice pitched with incredulity. "No," Kizera replied firmly. "I believe these products reflect what already makes them dangerous. A neurological architecture that thrives on confronting the impossible." He paused, gathering courage for his next statement. "Superior Council members, in my 5 years observing humans, I've come to a disturbing conclusion. We have never encountered a species whose evolutionary path optimized them, not for survival within their environment, but for changing their environment to suit their needs." Kizera shifted the display one final time, showing time-lapse footage of human history. Primitive settlements becoming villages, villages becoming towns, towns becoming sprawling cities that transformed entire landscapes. "Honorable Council," Kizera concluded, his voice dropping to ensure their full attention. "We have encountered adaptive species before, but humans don't just adapt to challenges, they're addicted to them. In all my research, I found no evidence of humans ever encountering an obstacle they didn't eventually overcome through sheer persistent innovation." He looked directly at the Supreme Commander. "If we attack Earth, we won't be initiating a conquest. We'll be presenting them with exactly the type of existential challenge they've been unconsciously preparing for throughout their entire history." The holographic recording continued, showing the human delegation sharing their strange brown beverage with the bewildered Voidborn scouts. Kizera zoomed in on the face of the lead human diplomat, a middle-aged female with silver-streaked hair and laugh lines around her eyes. This human is Dr. Eleanor Chen, their chief cynobiologist, Kuzara explained. Note her body language. While our sensors detected elevated heart rate and adrenaline levels indicating fear, her external behavior shows curiosity and even amusement. The war minister flared his neck frills in disgust. Primitive deception tactics. All prey species attempt to mask fear. I believe the same, Kizeret admitted, until I witnessed this exchange. The recording advanced to show Commander Zextrol, the Voidborn field leader, activating a standard fear inducement protocol, releasing hypersonic frequencies known to trigger panic responses in most carbon-based life forms. The audio sensors captured the humans wincing slightly before the female leader, Dr. Chen, stepped forward. That's quite the party trick, she said, her voice steady despite the discomfort evident in her microexpressions. But if you're trying to communicate, we might suggest a different approach. We brought translation algorithms and cultural exchange protocols. Would you prefer those over the whole scare the natives routine? Fazara paused the recording. Observe their reaction, not submission, not aggression, but something our xenopsychologists had never documented, humor in the face of fear. The strategic advisor's sensory appendages trembled with agitation. Explain the significance. Humans use humor as a neurological dampener for fear responses, Kizera replied. When facing potential threats, they can psychologically distance themselves through this mechanism they call laughing in the face of danger. It allows them to maintain cognitive function under stress conditions that would incapacitate most species. He resumed the recording. The scene showed Commander Zextrol switching to Intimidation Display Mode 2, expanding his biomechanical armor to twice its normal size while deploying neural disruptors. The humans exchanged glances. Another member of their team, a dark-skinned male with a scar across his jaw, leaned toward Dr. Chen. 20 credits says their next move is the teeth thing. Sure enough, Zextrol extended his multiple rows of serrated mandibles in the display that had caused 3 species to surrender immediately in previous first contacts. The human team actually applauded. Called it. The scared human exclaimed, while another passed him something small, presumably the wagered credits. Kizara highlighted this exchange for the council. They were placing bets on our intimidation sequence. They found it predictable. The Supreme Commander's secondary eyes narrowed to slits. Impossible. Our bioweapon displays are based on universal fear triggers across carbon-based life. Yes, Kizara agreed. And humans have extensively studied those same triggers through their evolutionary history of facing predators. But they've developed something remarkable, psychological countermeasures through social bonding. By facing fear together and treating it as a shared experience to be analyzed rather than fled from, they neutralize its effect. The recording continued, showing Dr. Chen pouring more of the brown liquid into small containers and offering one to Commander Zextrol. I think we got off on the wrong foot, she said. This is coffee, our traditional peace offering. It's bitter, but so are most first meetings. Let's start again. We're representatives of Earth. We've been watching your observation post for months and figured it was time to introduce ourselves properly rather than let you think we hadn't noticed you. Kizara paused the recording again, noting the shock rippling through the council chamber. They knew we were observing them, the intelligence director whispered. Yes, Kizara confirmed, and rather than react with panic or hostility, they chose diplomacy, but on their terms, not ours. This is the pattern I observed repeatedly during my 5-year mission. Humans don't follow expected response patterns. They improvise, they adapt, and most dangerously. He gestured toward the frozen image of the smiling humans offering coffee to their potential conquerors. They connect, even with those they have every reason to fear. The Weapons Master's protest died in his throat as Kizera expanded the holographic display to reveal a human military encampment in a region identified as Afghanistan. The timestamp indicated this was from 3 years earlier, during Kizura's observation mission. This forward operating base was cut off from supply lines for 73 days. Kizura explained. According to our conquest models, isolation from technological resources should have rendered them combat ineffective within a week. The footage showed human soldiers gathering around a table covered with disassembled equipment, communication devices, weapons components, and what appeared to be parts from their ground vehicles. Watch closely, Kizura instructed. A female soldier with close-cropped hair held up what appeared to be a cooking device. The heating element from the microwave should work. The waveguide's the right frequency if we recalibrate it. Another soldier nodded, already adapting a power source salvaged from a damaged drone. If we can boost the signal using the satellite dish components, we might reach headquarters. The intelligence director leaned forward, his compound eyes reflecting the hologram. They're creating communications equipment from cooking appliances. Precisely, Kizura confirmed. When we disable their military technology in the initial attack, we assume they'll be rendered incommunicado. But humans don't compartmentalize technology the way we do. To them, all devices are potential components for other devices. The footage shifted to show the completed communication array, a bizarre amalgamation of military equipment, cooking devices, and parts salvaged from recreational electronics. The soldiers cheered as a voice crackled through their makeshift speaker. This isn't an isolated incident, Kizura continued, expanding the display to show similar scenarios from around the planet. Civilian engineers repurposing common household items to create emergency medical equipment during natural disasters. Researchers in impoverished regions building laboratory equipment from discarded electronics. Children constructing working computers from salvaged parts. They call this hacking, Kizura explained. Not merely circumventing security protocols as we define it, but reimagining the intended purpose of any technology. It's embedded in their educational systems from early development stages. The science director's membranes pulsed with agitation, but our threat assessment indicated their technology is centuries behind ours. These cooking devices cannot possibly threaten our quantum-aligned weapons. Kizura acknowledged this with a gentle hand gesture he'd adopted from humans. The individual components, no, but their approach to technology itself is what we fail to understand. He tapped the neural interface, bringing up a new series of images, human historical records showing technological adaptation during their numerous conflicts. In each major war, humans made technological leaps that should have taken decades in just a few years. Under pressure, their innovation accelerates exponentially. They have a cultural saying, necessity is the mother of invention. When we attack Earth, we won't be facing their current technology. We'll be facing what they create in response to us. The military strategist's sensory appendages quivered. You suggest they could advance their technology to match ours simply by seeing it. Not immediately, Kizura clarified, but far faster than our models predict, and with approaches we wouldn't anticipate. He displayed one final recording, a human child's birthday celebration. The adults had carefully wrapped a gift in decorative paper. The child, rather than unwrapping where the paper was secured with adhesive, simply tore through the center. This is how humans approach obstacles, Kizura said quietly. When the established path is blocked, they don't repeatedly attempt the expected approach. They create an entirely new path that we wouldn't consider. Our defensive algorithms are designed to counter attacks from familiar angles. Humans specialize in the unfamiliar. Kizura swept his hand across the neural interface, and the holographic display transformed to show a bleak, snow-covered landscape. Human soldiers huddled in hastily constructed shelters, their equipment frozen and damaged, their numbers clearly decimated. This engagement occurred during what humans call World War II, one of their largest planetary conflicts, Kizura explained. These soldiers, from a nation called Finland, were outnumbered 10-1 by a technologically superior invading force. According to our military doctrine, surrender was their only logical option. The strategic minister's color plates flashed with impatience. And yet you claim they prevailed. Through what technological advantage? Through none, Kizera responded. They had fewer weapons, outdated equipment, and minimal supplies. What they possessed was something our military simulations cannot quantify. He zoomed in on the face of one Finnish soldier, his features gaunt from hunger, eyes hollow from exhaustion, yet showing an unmistakable expression of grim determination. They call it Saisu, a cultural concept approximating what we might term determined resilience beyond rational limits. These forces adapted to conditions that should have been lethal, developed unconventional tactics specific to their environment, and inflicted casualties at a ratio that defied all strategic models. The hologram shifted to show a series of similar historical scenarios: Greek forces at Thermopylae, Vietnamese guerrillas against mechanized armies, resistance fighters across occupied territories. This pattern repeats throughout their history, Kizera continued. When defeat seems mathematically certain, humans frequently achieve outcomes that defy probability. They've institutionalized this tendency in their military training. The display changed to show modern human military academies. Inside the classrooms, human officers studied holographic reconstructions of historical defeats. They spend more time analyzing their failures than their victories, Kizera noted. Each generation builds upon the adaptations of the previous one. They've created a cumulative knowledge base specifically focused on overcoming superior forces. The war minister's feeding appendages twitched with skepticism. All species learn from combat experiences. This is not unique to humans. The difference, Kizera countered, is in their relationship to failure, where most species, including ourselves, treat defeat as something to avoid. Humans treat it as a necessary component of ultimate success. He displayed a montage of human educational practices where young humans were encouraged to attempt difficult tasks, fail, and try different approaches. From their earliest development stages, they're conditioned to view initial failure as information rather than outcome. Their historical records celebrate what they call learning the hard way. This perspective extends to their military doctrine. Kizera brought up footage from human combat training facilities, where soldiers repeatedly ran scenarios designed to be unwinnable, then conducted extensive analyses of each failure. They call this failing forward, he explained. Their training systems are specifically designed to induce failure under controlled conditions, allowing them to build neural pathways for adaptation under extreme stress. The science director's sensory appendages trembled slightly. You suggest that by defeating their initial defenses, we would be providing them with precisely the data they need to develop countermeasures, Kizera finished. Our first victories would become the foundation of their eventual strategy. This is why standard conquest models fail when applied to humans. He displayed one final image, a stylized bird wreathed in flames from human mythology. They have a symbol for this adaptive resilience. The phoenix, a creature that burns completely to ash, only to be reborn stronger than before. It appears across their cultures for thousands of years. This isn't merely mythological thinking. It's a cognitive framework embedded in their problem-solving approach. When we destroy their initial defenses, we won't be witnessing their end. We'll be inadvertently facilitating their rebirth. The chamber fell silent as Kizera expanded the neural scans, highlighting the unusual patterns in the human brain. What you're seeing, he explained, is something our neurologists initially classified as a malfunction in our scanning equipment. The human subjects were presented with scenarios designed to trigger surrender responses, situations where continued resistance would only increase suffering without changing the outcome. The science director's color membranes pulsed with agitation, and yet their neural pathways show increased activity rather than the expected dampening effect. Precisely, Kizera confirmed. When informed that a situation is hopeless, approximately 70% of human subjects experience a counterintuitive neural response, the activation of reward centers associated with continued defiance. He displayed comparative scans from multiple species encountered by the Empire. In each non-human example, The recognition of inevitable defeat triggered clear biological surrender responses, reduced neural activity, hormone cascades designed to conserve energy, and psychological preparation for capitulation. Humans appear to be neurologically rewarded for resistance, even when that resistance is objectively futile. Kizera continued. They experience a sensation they call satisfaction when refusing to accept defeat, regardless of practical outcome. The military strategist's feeding appendages twitched skeptically. This seems maladaptive for survival. From an individual perspective, yes, Kizera agreed. But from a species perspective, it creates unpredictable response patterns that confound predators or invaders. A certain percentage of humans will always choose resistance regardless of cost-benefit analysis. He shifted the display to show human sporting competitions, athletes continuing despite injuries, teams playing despite impossible odds of victory, individuals attempting challenges repeatedly after dozens of failures. They incorporate this neural reward mechanism into their cultural practices, Kizera noted. Their entertainment consistently reinforces the concept that persistence beyond reasonable limits is admirable. Their highest status is often granted not to those who succeed easily, but to those who endure the greatest hardship before eventual success. The display shifted to show footage from human space programs, repeated rocket failures followed by eventual success, astronauts facing life-threatening conditions with calm problem-solving approaches, mission control teams working through seemingly insurmountable technical failures. Their early space exploration is particularly illustrative, Kizera explained. When an oxygen tank exploded on their lunar mission designated Apollo 13, rendering success impossible and survival unlikely, their response was not to accept death, but to completely reimagine their available resources. Their famously transmitted phrase was not, "We surrender," but "Houston, we have a problem," signaling the beginning of a solution-finding process, not the end of hope. The Supreme Commander's sensory appendages quivered with growing concern. You suggest their resistance would intensify rather than diminish after initial defeats. The data supports this conclusion, Kizera confirmed. When facing extinction-level threats, humans don't follow standard population preservation protocols. They don't become more conservative or risk-averse. Instead, they become more experimental, more willing to attempt improbable solutions. He displayed one final set of brain scans, comparing baseline human neural patterns with those experiencing what they termed back-against-the-wall scenarios. Note the increased neural connectivity between problem-solving centers and risk assessment regions, Kizera pointed out. When we push humans to the edge of defeat, we don't diminish their cognitive capacity, we enhance it. Their brains literally function more efficiently under existential threat. Kizera paused, allowing the implications to sink in. The most dangerous human is not the one who believes victory is assured, but the one who has nothing left to lose. And in declaring war on their species, we would create an entire planet of such humans. The intelligence director gestured toward the display, which showed human nations engaged in heated diplomatic confrontations, internal political strife, and competing economic systems. Your argument contradicts our most thorough intelligence assessments, she noted. These divisions run deep, ideological, religious, cultural. Our infiltration units confirm genuine animosity between factions. These are not superficial conflicts. Kizera nodded, the human gesture now second nature after his years of embedding. The conflicts are indeed genuine. What our intelligence failed to recognize is their contextual nature. He shifted the display to historical footage. Bitter enemies suddenly working in concert when faced with natural disasters. Traditional rivals providing aid during crisis. Opposing military forces combining efforts against common threats. Observe this pattern, Kizera directed. These two nations had nuclear weapons aimed at each other for decades in what they call the Cold War. Yet when a third party threatened either one, information sharing between their intelligence agencies increased by 700%. He expanded the display to show more examples. international responses to disease outbreaks, global cooperation after tsunami devastation, multinational efforts to rescue trapped miners. Humans maintain their divisions until a greater context emerges, Kizera explained. They have a cultural principle they call the enemy of my enemy is my friend. Their ability to rapidly recategorize threat priorities exceeds any species we've encountered. The strategic minister's feeding appendages clicked in agitation. Surely some divisions can be exploited. Religious differences, perhaps. Kizara brought up new images, religious leaders from traditionally opposed faiths standing together against natural disasters, ethical crises, or external threats. Their religious frameworks, despite apparent contradictions, share common foundations regarding species preservation. Kizera noted, when existential threats emerge, doctrinal differences become secondary to shared values. Their religions, rather than dividing them during crisis, often provide psychological frameworks for sacrifice and cooperation. He shifted again to human political systems, showing opposing parties temporarily suspending hostilities during wartime. They call it politics stops at the water's edge, a principle that internal disagreements, however severe, are set aside when facing external threats. The divisions we perceive as weaknesses are actually distributed cognitive processing. The science director's vision membranes pulsed with confusion. Explain. Their argumentative nature, Kizera clarified, is not despite their intelligence but because of it. Through continuous disagreement, they simultaneously explore multiple solution paths. What appears to be inefficient conflict is actually parallel processing of potential strategies. Kizara displayed footage from human decision-making bodies, passionate debate followed by unified action, competing proposals being merged into stronger solutions, minority viewpoints contributing critical insights to majority plans. When we attack, Kizara continued, we expect their divisions to fracture their response. Instead, their response will incorporate multiple approaches simultaneously. Where we apply linear strategy trees, they will implement dozens of counter-strategies in parallel, quickly abandoning failed approaches while reinforcing successful ones. The war minister's color plates flushed with agitation. You suggest we cannot exploit these obvious fractures. I suggest, Kizera replied carefully, that what we perceive as fractures are actually adaptive flexibility. Their apparent disunity allows them to approach problems from multiple perspectives simultaneously, a significant tactical advantage. He displayed one final image: human children on a playground, engaged in heated argument over game rules, only to instantly unite when confronted by older bullies. This behavior begins in their earliest social development, Kizera observed. They can transition from internal conflict to unified response in seconds. By attacking Earth, we wouldn't be exploiting their divisions, we would be eliminating them, creating a level of human cooperation unprecedented in their history. The chamber grew unnaturally still as Kizera advanced the holographic display to show human military units providing medical aid to enemy combatants, evacuating civilian populations from combat zones, and risking their own safety to minimize collateral damage. Our psychological warfare models predict that inflicting civilian casualties will demoralize enemy forces, the war minister stated, his voice tinged with confusion. Yet you claim their ethical constraints strengthen them. This contradicts all conquest data. Kizera acknowledged the apparent contradiction with a slight nod. Previous conquest data comes from species with different psychological architectures. Human ethical frameworks don't merely restrict behavior, they provide purpose and psychological sustainability. He displayed neural scans comparing human soldiers operating under different ethical conditions. The first showed troops engaged in operations with strict civilian protection protocols. The second showed forces in scenarios with no such constraints. Note the differences in these brain patterns, Kizera directed. When operating under ethical constraints, humans show increased activity in regions associated with focus, clarity, and psychological resilience. When those constraints are removed, we see increased neural markers for trauma, cognitive dissonance, and psychological deterioration. The strategic minister's color membranes pulsed with irritation. You suggest their arbitrary moral codes enhance combat effectiveness. This defies evolutionary logic. For solitary predator species, perhaps, Kizura conceded. But humans evolved as social hunters requiring group cohesion. Their moral frameworks aren't arbitrary. They're sophisticated social technologies that maintain psychological health during extreme stress. They've institutionalized this understanding. The display shifted to show human military training facilities, where ethical decision-making was integrated with tactical exercises, troops rehearsing civilian protection protocols alongside combat maneuvers. They've learned through bitter experience, Kizura explained. During conflicts where ethical constraints collapsed, their forces experienced catastrophic psychological casualties, what they term moral injury. These injuries compromised combat effectiveness more severely than physical wounds. He displayed historical data from human conflicts spanning centuries, showing the correlation between ethical violations and subsequent psychological collapse within fighting forces. The pattern is consistent, Kizura continued. Units that maintain ethical coherence demonstrate superior adaptability, resilience, and combat effectiveness over extended engagements. Those that abandon ethical frameworks experience rapid psychological degradation. The science director's sensory appendages twitched with growing discomfort. You suggest our standard terror tactics would be counterproductive. Precisely, Kizura confirmed. When we commit atrocities to break their will, we actually strengthen their resolve by providing moral clarity. Ambiguity erodes human performance. Moral certainty enhances it. He displayed footage of human resistance movements fighting against historically oppressive regimes. The more brutal the oppression, the more determined the resistance became. Their literature and historical records repeatedly demonstrate this principle, Kizura noted. They have sayings like the moral arc of the universe is long, but it bends toward justice, and one person with courage makes a majority. These aren't merely inspirational phrases. They're psychological technologies that enable sustained resistance against overwhelming odds. Kizura paused, allowing the implications to sink in. Our conquest doctrine relies on breaking enemy morale through escalating brutality. With humans, this approach backfires. Their ethical frameworks don't restrict their fighting capacity. They enable it. The hologram shifted to show human medical units treating wounded voidborn soldiers captured during border skirmishes, providing the same care given to their own troops despite no reciprocal agreements. This behavior isn't weakness, Kizura concluded quietly. It's a form of strength we haven't evolved to recognize. They fight more effectively because of their moral constraints, not despite them. And in attempting to exploit what we perceive as ethical limitations, we would only activate their most powerful psychological resources. The Supreme Commander rose to his full height, towering over the neural display, his primary eyes fixed on Kizura with an intensity that would have caused most subordinates to recoil. You've presented compelling observations, Ambassador, he acknowledged, his voice resonating through the chamber. Yet one question remains unanswered. If humans possess these formidable adaptive capabilities, why haven't they advanced further technologically? Their weapons remain primitive compared to ours. Their understanding of quantum mechanics is elementary. They've barely left their planetary cradle. Kizura met the commander's gaze steadily, another human habit he'd unconsciously adopted. Because they've never needed to, he replied simply. Their greatest advances have always come in response to their greatest challenges, and they have never faced a challenge like us. The display shifted to show the accelerating timeline of human technological development, from simple tools to nuclear power in mere millennia, from basic flight to space exploration in less than a century. Their pattern is consistent, Kizura explained. When existential threats emerge, their innovation curve doesn't follow linear progression. It spikes exponentially. He highlighted key historical periods where human technology had advanced with unusual rapidity during conflicts or crises. Their digital information network called the Internet was developed from military communication contingencies. Their space program emerged from ballistic missile research. Their greatest medical breakthroughs often occurred during pandemics. They advance fastest when survival demands it. The science director's sensory appendages quivered. You suggest our arrival would trigger another such advancement spike. Not merely trigger it, Kizera corrected. Accelerate it beyond any historical precedent. We would be presenting them with technologies they haven't imagined, challenges they've never encountered, and existential pressure beyond anything in their evolutionary history. The hologram expanded to show human research facilities, where scientists were already theorizing about concepts remarkably similar to voidborne technology, despite having no direct knowledge of it. They've already conceptualized many of our advancements theoretically, Kizera noted. Their fiction writers have imagined technologies similar to our quantum displacement drives, neural interfaces, and even dimensional phasing. They lack only the confirmation that such technologies are possible and the urgent necessity to develop them. He paused, allowing his next words to carry their full weight. We would provide both. The chamber fell silent as the implications settled over the council. Kizera displayed one final series of images: human responses to previous devastating events, cities rebuilt after nuclear destruction, ecosystems restored after environmental collapse, societies reconstructed after plague and war. In all their history, Kizera observed quietly, humans have never encountered an external intelligence capable of threatening their species. Their adaptations have evolved to overcome natural disasters, internal conflicts, and resource limitations. They have been waiting, unconsciously preparing for a worthy challenge, something that would unite their distributed cognitive potential, focus their parallel processing social structures, and channel their neurological reward systems toward a single objective. The strategic minister's feeding appendages clicked nervously. You believe we would become that catalyst? I know we would, Kizera affirmed. And in the process, we would teach them everything they need to know about our weaknesses, our technologies, and our strategic thinking. We would arrive as conquerors and inadvertently serve as their most valuable instructors. He deactivated the neural display, leaving only his final assessment hovering in the darkened chamber. We would not be subjugating a primitive species. We would be awakening one with the potential to surpass us. And they would never stop until they had done so.